Disorder having broken out.
Hello everyone, welcome to Praxis TV, and today my guest is Dr Lisa McKenzie, who's a sociologist and writer, campaigner, and daughter and granddaughter of miners, and here with us to talk about class and our experiences of being working class. So welcome and thanks for coming along.
No, thanks for inviting me, Mandy. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks. So the first question I'm going to ask you, I already know the answer to, but I'll ask you it in a slightly different way. So
you don't know, I change my mind regularly.
Do you? You won't know about this. Are you working class?
I am, yeah. Funnily enough.
So why, like, what? You know what? Everyone has these arguments about what makes you middle class and so on and so forth, right? So what is it that you would say defines you as middle class, as working class, and why aren't you middle class?
Well, I mean, the thing about class, it's like everybody's got a problem with it, and that's why sometimes you just have to make a stand. And so, you know, I make a stand with it. Listen, I'm working class.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a working class woman. I belong to a working class woman who belongs to a working class woman who belonged to a working class woman. And as far back as you go in my history, you know, it's farm labourers, factory workers, miners, workhouse residents, mill workers. You know, there's nothing else in my history at all, nothing. And I'm the first one, to be honest, who's, I mean, and even I've got that history as well. You know, I left school at 16. I left school before I should because my dad was on strike, so it was 1984. And then I went straight into a factory, and I was there. I worked in the same factory for 10 years. So, you know, I was making tights. In fact, no, I went to my first factory I worked in, actually. I was only there 6 weeks, and that was my first job that I got. And it was almost like I was waiting to get into the factory, into my mum's factory where my mum worked, because they weren't taking on until August. So I went and worked in another factory from May to August. So, so I worked in, you know, in the factories for 10 years making tights. And that, you know, and growing up in a working class family, that's who I knew I was. You know, I was very secure. There's no insecurity about my family at all. We talked about class. My granddad told us we were working class people. My mum told us that we were working class people, and we also knew that that was a good thing to be. I remember being a little girl going, no, you know, I'm dead lucky I am that I'm working. My granddad would. Yeah, because my granddad would be saying, you know, we're working class, we are, Lisa. That means that we're strong, you know, and we keep the lights on, and you know, we're good, strong, proud people, and I grew up with really, really positive messages about being working class. So it's something I've always been aware of. It's not, you know, I didn't go to university when I was 32, which is when I went to university, and then go, oh my God, I'm working class. I already knew it. I knew it all my life. So I mean, there's many definitions of what working class is.
Yeah.
You know, you get the Marxists that think that everybody's got a wage who doesn't own the means of production is working class.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very rudimentary reading of class, actually. And now as a sociologist, I've got the words to explain that. So, you know, he's an architect who's working for a company, you know, but is right at the top there. Is he working class? No, of course he's not. So for me, class is about, I mean, I'm a sociologist, so for me, it's a Bourdieusian understanding of class. So there was this sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu. He's a French sociologist. He wrote about class. He was working class himself. He come from southern France, which is a bit like Northern England.
Yeah.
He had a Southern French accent, so when he went to Paris, he straight away there was, very similar to how we understand class in the UK.
Yeah.
And he wrote about power and your relationships and how close you are to institutional power.
Yeah.
He wrote about economic capital. How much of that did you have? He wrote about social capital, your networks, who you had contact with and what they could do for you.
Yeah.
He wrote about cultural capital, your education, your cultural taste. He also understood how society judges that taste.
Yes.
So therefore, some things that, and it's always the things that working class people like, are of very little value, and the things that the middle class like are of lots of value.
Yeah.
Watching Coronation Street, if there's not a lot of cultural capital to that. Going to the opera, there's loads of that. Even though there's the same thing, really.
There's the prestige thing and what's allowed to be art and what's not allowed to be art. Yeah.
And so Bourdieu, and I understood. I mean, I always understood this. I always knew as a working class girl that there was things about us that was laughed at, or that are wearing skin tight jeans and high heel shoes and that. And I always knew that these were things that were laughed at us. So I was always aware of this. I just didn't have the language until I went to university. So for me, class is about the way that all these things intersect.
Yes.
And also how you are connected to institutional power.
Yeah.
And so for me, so here I am, Lisa McKenzie, Dr Lisa McKenzie, an academic at Russell Group University. And why do I still call myself working class? Because I'm still a working class woman, and I don't have connections to institutional power.
Yeah.
I'm
even with all of those achievements.
I'm so yes, I'm in that. Am I getting all the good stuff from that? No.
It's difficult, isn't it, sometimes when you look at why you're doing the things that you're doing. If you've managed to get yourself in a position to have some influence as a working class person and as a working class woman especially, you're in an unusual position and you've got an unusual vantage point on all of it, the whole thing, the whole system. So then the temptation is to try and do something meaningful with that. But the minute you try and do something meaningful with it, you're not only standing out because you're working class and you're a square peg in a round hole, but you're also getting people's backs up. It's not your intention to do that, but you're getting people's backs up because you've got the audacity to.
No.
Yeah, I know you do. I know you do.
No. I mean, I'm going to be really honest about. What I do. I mean, I sometimes I'm a provocateur, and I do get people's backs up, and I'm quite comfortable and happy to do that.
Yeah.
Because listen, I know as a working class woman with the accent I've got and where I come from and the life that I've lived, I know that just being in a room can sometimes offend people, and I have no apologies for that. None. And so if I find myself in a position where I'm in a place where I'm expected to apologize for who I am, I'm not going to be doing that. And instead of that, I'm going to challenge that, that thinking that's in that room. I am definitely going to challenge that. There's no apologies from me for who I am, and never will be.
No, well, I'm kind of the same, but it's not like you come away completely unscathed from living your life like that. Not at all. It's tiring. It's tiring.
No, you have to. You go home and you lick your wounds.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the truth. That's the truth of it. You might have to you might stand in a room and you might have to battle constantly, just for your right to be there. I mean, not to even get anything from that room. But just the right to be in it. It's a battle all the way through it. And you go home and you feel absolutely like you've been in a war. And you've been in a class war.
It's true, and it's the experience of being sort of someone who's working class, who's just doing what you do and just being who you are within a middle class environment, it's hugely unpopular. And it doesn't really matter whether it's within academia, politics, or, you know, law, or whatever it is.
The culture industries,
Yeah.
wherever. I mean, for me now, the middle class has colonized every single institutional space.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, unless you are working in Amazon warehouse, or working in a care home, or in, to be honest, to be anywhere else as a working class person, you've either got to be very grateful to somebody for allowing you to be there, or you're in a war.
Yeah. It's like a double whammy, isn't it? Because, like, as a woman, if you're in a room with men, because men are socialized differently, you know, they'll take up the space like quite readily, and they'll use up all the air in the room if you let them, kind of thing. Not because they're meaning to be arrogant necessarily. It's just that they're socialized to have that confidence and to feel superior, and their views are more valid. And then if you're a working class woman, you've got that class. It's exactly the same thing. People who are middle class, whether they're men or women, feel.
I'll tell you what, though, I'd rather be in a room full of working class men.
Oh yeah.
Than middle class women.
My God, you're so right about that. Definitely.
I'd tell you that, because all this sort of, and again, this is another very unpopular thing, is, feminism doesn't really cut across classes.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
This door doesn't cut across class. And and again, I've learned this. I actually learned this a long time ago. I learned this before I even was aware that this was a thing. I'd learned this. I learned this in the 1984 strike. Actually. It was when my dad was on strike. And Mandy, was your family on? Were you in the miners' strike? Did you?
No, I remember it on the news. My stepdad was a car mechanic, so they struggled. But I wasn't connected with any mining communities or anything like that where I grew up. But I remember seeing it on the news. It was shocking.
Yeah, well, we were in Nottingham, and my dad was on strike. And we my mum set up the Women Against Pit Closures in Putney Ashfield, where I live.
Wow, amazing.
And oh my God, I learned that year. You know what? Forget university. What I learned that year, but again, none of it was valued until I got to university, and these lecturers started saying to me, "Excuse me, did you just say your dad was on strike?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they were like, "My God, you lived it. You were there." And I know that this was it. So, over the years, I've really started to look back at that. But I mean, these experiences I was having. So during the 1984 strike, we used to have lots and lots of, tourists, you'd call them now, people who wanted to come and look at us. So, we'd be in Nottinghamshire, we'd be in Sutton Ashfield, where I come from, and we'd have like nights, to sort of raise money and stuff like that. And people would want to come. So you'd get like, I can remember once we had, this is an honest, swear to God truth, we had the Oxford and Cambridge feminist drama group. Honestly, right. And they come and did a play for us. There was like, so they'd written a letter to my mum, and my mum was like, yeah, you can come or whatever. And when I met these women, they come into our house, in our council house in Corset. They come in the house and they sat there, they got dungarees on, and they were hairy, and they were everything you would have imagined. And I was 16, and I was like new wave, punk, makeup and coloured hair, and and I looked at these women and thought, who the fuck are they? What? And they would have been only a few years older than me, but they seemed like aliens. And they did this play for us. So we went down to the pub where we were all going, and we did this play, and they said only women's allowed to come.
Right.
And I was like, oh, all right. And my mum, and I was like, I don't want to go. And my mum was like, you go in, you come in. But these are guests, you've got to be nice to them.
Yeah.
And they did this play for us, and we're all sat there, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And they were like, and at the end, they stood there and went, women unite. We should have the right to go working down the pit if we want to.
Oh, what?
And all the women, the mining women, just sat there looking at her.
Oh
And
my.
my sister's about 7 or 8, and she stood up and she went, "Mom," because I'd been winding her up all day, going, "Oh, look, the feminists are going to come and take you away." And my sister sort of stood on the chair, went, "Mom, don't let the feminists put me down the pit." And I knew that these lot didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
And I remembered looking at Mum going, "Mum, these women want to put us back down the pit. We spent 200 years trying to get out of there."
Yeah.
And I knew, and I knew from that was my first ever encounter, apart from doctors and school teachers.
Yeah.
Because they are always your middle class encounter. But
they were
Pardon?
Well, they were. I was going to ask you about that because, I mean, when I was a kid, my culture wasn't like my teacher's culture. And you could really feel it. They had like apart from there was one, I remember he was lovely. And it wasn't at the time I didn't think about class because I was only dead little. But I can remember he was different from the other teachers. Didn't have the same disapproval, and he was much warmer and more helpful. And he was working class. And I think that's probably what made the difference. But the others were all, they're points of reference in life. The way they expressed themselves in terms of their language, who their favourites were, who was approved of and disapproved of. It was really, you couldn't put a name on it, but it was there for all to see. But I don't know if it's the same now.
I think it's absolutely, I think it's exactly the same.
Do you?
To be honest.
Right.
I think the education structure and the education system means that even, I just think it's a bit like academia. You walk into it and the structure is so strong.
Yeah.
You're swimming against the tide immediately.
Okay.
So it's things like, you get into school and, presentation becomes really important, and, having the right colour shoes on becomes and whatever it is that the school decides is that important, these things become, they become more important than anything else. And I mean, I've done research for years now, particularly with working class women, and this point always comes up when I interview working class women about schools, that the battles that the schools will go into battle over things that really don't matter. They will go into battle over your kid going to school in black trainers rather than black shoes. They will go to battle, and the mothers are like, it doesn't matter.
No,
it doesn't matter.
Definitely not. And there's far more important things.
And over the years, I have absolutely. I mean, I remember doing it myself as a kid. I remember having to stand on a chair for a whole day and being shamed because I'd wrote an essay in green pen. I was about 8. And the reason I'd wrote this essay in green pen is because my teacher used to write in green pen, and I thought it was really cool. So I wrote my essay in green pen, and she absolutely she was so offended that I got the balls to write in a green pen, that she stood me on a chair and shamed me for like 7 hours.
Wow.
And and these battles that working class mothers have with schools, it seems to be never ending. It seems to be absolutely never, it's hairstyles and kids getting sent home because they've had a Mohican, or they've got a long fringe, or or they've got blue hair or whatever. I've noticed this over the years, from my whole time, from me being at school to interviews I've done very recently. Schools will go into battle with working class people in such a way that it can only be one thing, and that's about teaching us right.
You're right. You are right. I had this conversation with Deirdre the other day as well. We were talking about that with schools. My great-grand, when she was in school, ate a gooseberry. She called them goosegogs. She ate goosegog in school, and it popped in her mouth, and the teacher went round and then sussed out, that it was her that had it, so she had to give her the bag out of her desk and her hand, and she got sent in the dunce's corner. And then at the end of the day, I think she got the cane, she got like the strap or the cane or something on her hand when she went home. And she was crying and sobbing, and she couldn't get over it. And her mother couldn't get out of her what had happened. For hours, she wouldn't say. But when she finally said what had happened, her mother, my great-great-gran, was storming down to the school into Miss Broadbent's office. I heard this story about 100 times. Went up to her, she was writing on the blackboard, and she grabbed hold of her hair by the back of her head, and she had a bun on her head, and she pulled it. You did to our Queenie. And she pulled the bun, and it came off in her hand. It was a false bun.
You know what?
Stories about our women.
I've seen them stories. I've seen them stories. I've experienced them stories, and they never change. I mean, like you said, you know, you can say that about you could tell them stories about your great grandma. I could introduce you to 24-year-old women whose kids are 5, and they're doing that, and they're telling me them stories right now.
Yes.
So this is why, if anybody reads my work, or anybody hears me, this is why I sound like a broken record, because I keep saying, it's like, you know, can she say something else? And it's like, do you know, I really wish I could say something else.
Yes.
I'm dying to say something new.
But
there's nothing new to say.
Yes.
As a sociologist, as a working class woman, you know, my experience, my research tells me that it just never bloody changes. Never. You know, the things that, you know, we are pulled up on is always about our manners, or our, you know, our value, or what we value, or how we speak, or you know, it's something about our detriment. And you know what, I've collected stories from hundreds of women over the years about this. You know, I mean, I start with my own. My first school report, I was, I don't know, 6.5. I'd got a reading age of 12. The only thing my school report said was how horrible I was as a kid. That was it. And you look, and actually you have to look at the top, because they tested me, and you could see my test ages on things. And I was really terrible at maths. And the only thing that this teacher had said was, you know, how badly behaved I am. You know, I'm always trying to get other kids in trouble. You know, I'm showing off all the time. And, you know, and her maths is absolutely awful. She can't add 1 and 1 up. At the top, it's like reading age 12. I'm 6. You know, age of testing 6 2/4 or whatever. And that is who I grew up thinking, that's who I was. Because it's not until you're an adult where you look at the top bit and go, and of course my mum didn't look at that. My mum never went to one of my my what they call them, school,
the parents' evening.
Yeah, my mum never went.
No.
My mum never went. She says, why am I going to go?
Yeah.
She says, why am I going to go?
Yeah.
Sit there and let them tell me off about you. You know what? School for most working class children is an absolutely horrendous place.
It is. It's an ordeal. Yeah, I didn't enjoy it at all.
It's an ordeal, and you know, and I'm sick of it always being the same thing. I'm sick of it.
But it's like you say about the broken. That's interesting to hear you say that about the broken record syndrome, because I'm the same. I am known for going on, banging on about class. I won't shut up about it. And the more stick I get for talking about it, and the more flack, kind of the more I can't stop talking about it. Because I'm so furious it doesn't get the attention that it should, you know.
Well, I mean, the reason it doesn't get attention that it should is because it's a difficult issue to raise. Because, you know, the whole class system relies on no one actually believing it's true. And that's, you know, that's it. If you, you know, if you believe there is a meritocracy, if you believe there's something called social mobility, and all you have to do is try really hard or work really hard, or, you know, have a natural ability for something, or find what your natural ability is. I mean, that's the other, you know, I haven't found it yet. You know, if that's what you believe, then it's your fault.
So we could create a term I think terminology is important here because we haven't got enough of a language, I think, to talk about these phenomena, but they're common phenomena that we all can identify, right? So middle class people are part of that problem. They're part of keeping that denial in place because they've got a vanity. I'm going to call it class vanity syndrome, because if we admit there's a class system and the working class and middle class culture and opportunity is different, is skewed, is not fair, then that means they've achieved what they've achieved and all the pride that they feel, you know, in what they've achieved because of advantage, not because of.
Well, this is what I suppose this is how I explain this, and I've explained this every week, every day. So I say to somebody or I write it somewhere. Is the class system is built on unfair disadvantages. Now, most people would accept that because they will accept, working class people, or even ethnic minority people. They'll understand, or women, or whatever. They'll understand that in the system there is some unfair disadvantages. So most people will accept that. But it's the other bit. It's the unfair advantages.
Yes.
And so the system is built with both. It's got unfair advantages for some, unfair disadvantages for others. And so therefore, in order to really deal with that system, you've got to look at both. And that's the thing that they'll never do, because what they'll do is, how many schemes is there in place? Oh, we'll do this for disadvantaged children, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll have this scheme, we'll have this, we'll have widening participation. But I tell you what they'll do for a university, they'll have a widening participation scheme, which is about basically looking for students from what they call non-traditional backgrounds. But what they will never do is do anything about the way that the middle class gain that system. So they'll never do anything about that. But they're always looking down, right, what can we do to them?
Well, we'll drag a few of them up or let a few of them through, as long as we don't have to change anything else or admit that there's a bigger problem than that.
And I mean, could you imagine if we said, right, okay, we do this on a point system. If you went to comprehensive school, you get 10 points. If you went to private school, you get 1.
They'd be horrified.
Could you imagine? Because what does immediately, it takes away, what's the only reason they pay for private school is because actually it works the other way around.
It gives them that advantage.
And until you stop that being such an advantage, nothing's going to change, not within education anyway. Nothing's going to, I mean, the class system is so far more than education. And, I work in education, and it's dead easy for, people sort of fall into this, education's the most important thing.
I agree.
But the class system is so much more.
Of course it is,
education. Because we've got a situation now where we've got working class people in education. We've got working class people at universities. And let me tell you now, it's doing fuck all.
Absolutely.
All it's doing is getting them into a load of debt.
I agree.
Because the way that the university system works is, those students are going to go to university. They are going to get a university education. And that in itself, to me, is important. And education is important for itself. But when it comes to the amount of debt they're going to get into paying for that education, and then the advantages that it's going to give them when they leave, which is very few, really. The money that they're paying, and that's how they're looking at it.
Absolutely. One of the hidden things, like, because within the Labour Party, I mean, I know you hate the Labour Party.
I do hate the Labour Party. If you ask me why.
I'm not overly enamoured myself right at the moment, but
well, I've hated them. I'll be honest, I've hated them for years.
I know.
I've hated them when everybody loved them. I hated them from being, I don't know, 10. I'm 52.
I've got
my mum was a massive Labour Party supporter. She was in the Labour Party. She delivered the leaflets. She went, I remember being young, at 17, being in bed hungover, and my mum's going around in the car, like going, vote for Labour. And I used to go, oh, fuck And my mum was a massive Labour Party supporter, but I could see, even at that age, that they were absolutely a bunch of bastards. I watched her campaign for councillor after councillor and MP after MP, and it was all about what she did for them.
Yeah.
They never did anything for her.
Yeah.
She ended up campaign, watching the Labour Party bang in rich friends into safe seats like Sutton in Ashfield. We had Jeff Hoon. I don't know if you remember who Jeff Hoon
I do remember that name. I can't remember what he looked like, but I think I do remember what he looked like, actually. Yeah.
He looked like a second-hand car salesman.
Yeah,
but he was
I remember.
He was the Ministry of War or whatever they call it.
Right.
Basically, he took us into Iraq.
Right, yeah.
And he was just basically Tony Blair's friend. It was his private school buddy.
So it's not someone who represents that community by any stretch. Yeah.
No, in Nottingham East, we got banned in Chris Leslie. And now we've got Nadia Whittone. Oh, God. Do you know what? And it's like, no, the people who live there, the working class people, the Labour Party for me is the reason I hate them so much is because I see them as always being the way to real class
in the way
emancipation. Yeah, they're just in the way.
That's how I see the middle class. The middle class. Yeah.
Well, the middle class, but the thing is they are middle class. I don't know.
Even when Corbyn was the leader, the membership was 70% middle class, but they wouldn't say that they were. They wouldn't identify as middle class.
That's what they said. Because I tell you what showed it. What showed it is when they were last December, when they were going around knocking on people's doors. They'd got thousands of these middle class people telling people on their own doorsteps how racist and disgusting they were. Because that's what they were doing. Hello, are you going to vote for Labour? No, we're not voting for them. We don't like them. Why not? That's because you're racist and vile, isn't it? That is what. That's the story that I got back.
Well, I was on the training courses for activists, and they were actually, to their credit, they were training activists don't say that, but they had to be told not to say it. That's the point. I mean, and still some of them will have said it, but the thing is, like, there was an obsession with private schools, and private schools is a big dividing line. I know that.
It is a dividing line, yeah.
But there again, it's not all about private schools, because that then allows a lot of middle class people off the hook, because there was a lot of middle class people in that party who identified as working class on the basis that they hadn't been to private school. But they'd got into the great universities because they'd had like private tutoring, they have a lovely bedroom, they've got the computer, they've got parents who can educate them. They go to all the like a lot of the middle class kids I know, when they go on a family day out, they'll go somewhere educational, and the parents are yattering on about boring things instead of having fun.
That's levels of cultural capital, isn't it? But also, I mean, middle class children, their parents have got the insider knowledge about which schools to send them to. So if there's a choice, so if they don't send them to private school, it's perhaps because there's a grammar school in the area that they'll get them into, or perhaps there's a really good state school.
Yes.
And so. That there is a million different ways how they can advantage themselves in a system that's created by them for them.
Absolutely. The
rest of us, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, women, working class mothers, start in battle with schools and end in battle with schools. And it's never, the amount of battles that I had with school, do you know in the end you give up?
You know when someone sees you as less than them before you've opened your mouth, don't you? You know when you're the enemy before you've even... And a lot of the middle class parents, they're on first name terms with the teachers and stuff like that.
There's a million different ways that they play to that advantage. And we don't have it. And so, yeah, it's not just about private school, but yeah, I mean, this private school situation, you know, yes, I've heard middle class people, you know, describe themselves going to, you know, a really lovely local school.
Yeah.
And then you find out that their really lovely local school was actually 5 bus rides away, and you know, they had a private bus to take them there, and you know, it weren't that local. Or, you know, they'd actually bought a house in the area so they could get to that school. Yeah, the system is made and created by middle class people for middle class people, which means that they can navigate it. Could you imagine us? Like, we lived in our council house, in our council estate. And can you imagine my mum said, well, I want you to go to this school, God knows where. How would we even do that? How would we know about that school?
You wouldn't, you don't. It's a network thing, and that's what's so difficult, is that you can't prove it. All of these things, you know, they're so subtle, but they're so powerful. They make such a massive difference to people's life chances when you add them all together, but you can't get your hands on them. You know what I mean? You can't hold them up in the light and say, this is what this looks like. But I mean, you know, I was going to ask you about sociology, because years ago when I did sociology, that was like a light went on for me, and I could put things in place. But it was brilliant in those days on class. It was brilliant. And I wondered, is it still? Have they neglected the issue of class now? Has it been dropped or?
Totally,
So interesting that. And
the last 2 universities that I've worked at, there's been no module that's got class in the title.
That's amazing, because it used to be sort of, when I studied it in the 80s, it was a huge part of
well, sociology came really out of the study of class, really. I mean, it was central to sociology, but now the last 2 universities I've worked at, there's been no module that's got class in the title. I mean, what you have to do is it goes in other places, but yes, it's part of class, gender, race. Well, it's not even, you know, it's
barely touched on.
It's barely touched on.
Because I can remember my index of names and theories and dates and all of that around class. There were so many amazing studies. I had this massive big index, you know, big thick index with cards in it, with them all written on. I wish I still had it, but I've bought me Haralambos. I've actually bought one off eBay.
All right.
Because I was like thinking, no, I know.
Can I just tell you, don't. You know what?
I was so pleased to see it, though. I was so pleased. I was pining for it, because I thought, where's all these studies now? You can't access them online. You can't find them. It was about the middle class teachers. They don't spend as many minutes in the day talking to praising and things.
But I've also read, you know, those reports about working class.
Yes, I've read them. Yeah.
And the whole of the Sure Start.
Yeah, value-based.
Came out of that sort of thing, you know, out of you know, poor parenting.
Do you know what? Like, this is
what they meant by poor parenting, is they meant working
class. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why I had, and again, like I said, I hated the Labour Party before it was fashionable to hate them. Because I hated them from Sure Start.
Yeah.
I think I'm the only person on the planet who thinks that Sure
point me asking you.
Was a fucking terrible thing.
Do you know what? I love to hear you say that, because it's such an unpopular thing to say. And I always flag up those things, because after I got out of university, I was volunteering for a year, but then I got a graduate job managing a family support project in Birkenhead. And Sure Start, that was in 2000, and Sure Start was in its first, they'd done a trailblazer year and then what have you. And at first I thought, right, okay, let's see what this is all about. But when I saw everyone that was in the room making the decisions on the steering group and all of that, they were just middle class women, you know, in middle class careers. The only working class people that were involved, it was supposed to be co-produced, but they just had like 2 working class people who were sort of brought on to say a little speech and go off. They had hardly any role. There was no, I saw with that there was an opportunity for them to get stuck in and do really right, full on like political education about class, so that those communities could feel they could grab hold of power for themselves. And I thought that's what surely that's what Labour's going to do, and they didn't. And my God, I mean, like, I had my doubts about Blair when he came in, but I was so relieved that the Tories weren't in anymore. I mean, I was a teenage mum at that time, and they were to blame for everything.
So was I. Well, I wasn't a teenage mum. I wasn't a teenager, but I mean, I wrote. I mean, the Sure Start stuff from when it first came. I started looking at the. I mean, again, I was not at university or anything then. I was I don't know. I just remember the Sure Start thing being such a fucking horrible thing. You know, that I remember. You know, women who I know. You know, was taken, you know, they loved you know, when it, because St. Anne's in Nottingham was one of the first places that they opened it.
Right.
And, you know, and I remember everybody being, oh my God, we're going to get free childcare. Because remember, up until that point, there'd been nothing, absolutely nothing. And we're going to get free childcare. And I thought, oh, and Leon was at school by that time anyway. And I remember women I know start taking the kids there, and I was a bit jealous, thinking, oh, you know, I've had to suffer, and now they're getting all this good stuff.
Yeah.
And then I remember some of the stories about what was happening when they were in there. You know, they were being judged and valued, judged constantly. You know, about, you know, somebody with a clipboard saying, how many wooden toys does your child have? How many plastic toys does your, you know, and these are women who've been judged all their lives, so they knew exactly what was going on. And I knew, you know, so from then, and when I actually wrote my PhD, that's what I wrote my PhD on, New Labour policy.
I sort of learned some of my mothering skills from Sure Start because of them doing all of the healthy things, you know, like cutting up all the bits of cucumber and grapes and stuff like that, and learning about sort of well, interacting with your baby and all this kind of thing. So when I had my next baby, because there was a long gap between the first and the second one, and I'd been working within this Sure Start thing, I think I was a bit sucked in with it, and I was like, okay, right, I've got to talk to this baby all the time because it didn't talk enough to me other one. So I talked to her non-stop. Oh my bloody God. Once she started talking, she didn't shut up. I was demented. I think I spoke to her a bit too much.
All of this was done with the assumption that working class motherhood is not good enough. That there's something wrong with it. And they pinpointed us and said, actually, and this is why I hated New Labour from day one, and always have, and everything that come after it actually, was because I recognised that what they were doing is saying the reason why this group of people are unsuccessful, because that's how they saw us, that we were just unsuccessful, we were failing, we were wrong. And the reason was about early years. And who is about, and it's so basically it's women, it's working class women. They don't know, working class motherhood is wrong.
It's not good.
So therefore, therefore they are the blame. That's where the blame lies for this rotten society.
I hated all the talk about aspiration as well. It's like,
you haven't got
enough aspiration, so we're going to raise your aspirations by giving you free childcare so you can go out and work for a bloody pittance. That's what it's turned out as. We've been conned into the workplace to do all the shit jobs. You can't afford to stay home if you want to with your kids. You know.
A few years ago, I was invited to Parliament, to Westminster, one of those what they call them, select committees.
Oh yeah.
It was a select committee on aspiration, on equality or something, aspiration and equality. And basically, got there and they just asked me the same old bloody questions, why aren't working class kids, in fact then they were alluding to constantly was white working class kids actually. How can we raise their aspirations? And I remember just sitting there, and there was Jess Phillips was there. I don't know, just a load of them anyway. I remember Jess Phillips was there. She was actually all right. And I remember there was I don't know who was there anyway, but whoever was there, these MPs, and they sat there asking me all these questions. And I said, all right, do you know what? Let's just stop here. I said, let me just tell you something. Working class kids have got too much aspiration. You don't need to aspire them anymore. They are already full of aspiration.
Yeah.
You go in any school and ask the kids what they want to be. They want to be everything. It's when they get to 12, 13, 14, they start to realise they can't be any of them things. So it's not about aspiration. They've got bloody loads of it. It's about the working class kids understanding the reality of their lives very quickly.
Yeah.
Far quicker than middle class kids.
Yes.
And this one Tory MP from Plymouth or somewhere, well, that's not my experience. I went into a school and I spoke to these little girls, you know, they were about 7. And when I said to them, you know, what do you want to do? They said they wanted to, you know, when they left school, she says they didn't have very much aspiration. They said they wanted to have a cupcake shop. And I'm like, what?
That's impressive. Yeah.
And I was like, you are telling these 7-year-old little girls want to have their own business in their community and make lovely things for their community to sell, and you don't see that as aspiration. And then she looked at me, she realised what she said, she went, perhaps that was a bad example. I was like, no, that was a perfect example. And this is, you know, these experiences I've had in my life, I've been very lucky because, you know, I'm a working class woman from Sutton in Ashfield who's, you know, who started life at Pretty Polly factory making ties, gets to be on a select committee about class. So I'm fully aware that the insight I've had into this. But on one hand, it's not done me any favours.
No.
Because it's left me gutted
and furious.
Not even, do you know, more now, less furious.
Really?
More, I feel more, do you know what? I feel like I've been gutted.
I am sick of it. I'm sick of it.
The last few years, I feel like I've literally been gutted because I just feel, I feel like the fights, I just think that we've lost.
Yeah.
I think we've lost, and I think with COVID, you know, nothing surprising has happened here. You know,
nothing at all.
The poor's got poorer. You know, the working class are unemployed or working in the worst conditions.
Yeah.
You know, rents are going through the roof. You know, God knows where we're all going to end up. Nothing is surprising here for those of us that have lived this life. And I just feel gutted because I don't know where to, you know, I've had so much energy and passion all my life and anger. And I just don't know what to do with it anymore. Because it's like, you know, I tell people not to vote, and I still think that's the right thing to do, actually, is withdraw from the system because it's just not working for us. But I am sick to death of this fight that I'm having to have all the time. You know, and I'm sick of working class people being told, you know, that just, you know, jam tomorrow.
Yeah. And also that there's no such thing as class, and the class isn't an issue anymore, you know.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what's really exacerbated this for me, and it's absolutely done it in the university system, is Brexit. Brexit has been an absolute watershed moment for class in Britain.
Yes.
Absolute. And working class people in this country now are hated. You know, they are despised. They are being blamed for everything. You know, and the type of places, you know, where I'm from, you know, those you know, deindustrialized areas, ex-mining communities, ex-steelworks, old coastal towns, all those, the poorest communities in the country, they are despised. You know, and I feel it. And because I come from that community, I feel that on my shoulders. And it weighs heavy. you know, I was at this online thing last night. It was a book reading, and it was about, you know, somebody had written a book about Orgreave in the miners' strike, and I sort of was typing something in the chat, and I'd wrote something about, you know, women's experiences in the miners' strike. But you know, that's don't. You know, I mean, there's only one narrative about women in the miners' strike, and that you know, we were all put upon and useless, and then we found our voice through the politics and came out of the kitchen, which is a bullshit middle class narrative. That's what the middle class thought about us. That's not what was happening.
No.
Working class women, what? They were all meek and mild and did no shit and was just cooking in the kitchen. I'm sorry. How many fucking working class women have you ever met? You know, we were just talking. I used to remember women going to school and battering teachers. You know, if that's not political, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
But you know, the narrative that was told about us is that we were just meek and mild, cooking in the kitchen, and then the strike came and we found our voice. You know, it's a very middle class narrative about us, and not true.
It's like the Match Girls strike, isn't it? Apparently. That's all the talk was about, all the celebration around that was the journalist who publicized it and got that sort of, it was at the beginning of the trade union movement and the role of women in that, but it was attributed to the journalist who reported it rather than the working class woman who got it all started. And someone's just written a book about that now.
And I've actually found that with the women in the miners' strike as well, to the point that a lot of the women that were in that time has taken on that narrative for themselves. You know, they've kind of said though, because they didn't have the scope to think about those, you know.
We do. If things get repeated at us about our history, do you think that we just get hoodwinked?
I watched it. I mean, I remember. I mean, I've got interviews that my mum did in the miners' strike. I've got a load of her stuff, and I read this interview that she'd done with one of these Cambridge women, and as you know, as good researchers back in the 80s, they sent her the transcript of what she'd said, and I read it, and I read what she was saying, and I thought, this is not my mum. You know, she actually was delivering this narrative
that they were expecting to hear.
They were, you know, that up until then I'd not done it, and it's like, before the miners' strike, you were a trade union official. You were trained to be a trade union official when you was 21.
Why didn't you tell them?
You know, why did you get? You know, it was you. I remember the first day my dad came back from the picket line. And my mum basically said, right, we're on strike. And my dad was like, well, and my dad was like, well, shall we wait to see what happens tomorrow? And my mum was like, no, I bloody tell you now, we're on strike. And it's like, and
so,
that's been happening in kitchens up and down the country.
Yet
the middle class narrative of us had to be something else. And I've watched this all my life, and I tell you what, it's and that's why I call it violence, because it's symbolic violence, because we get to own nothing. Not even our own story, not even our own history.
No, or your ideas. If you come up with a good idea, they'll appropriate it and discard you out of the picture. You know, and they've got no shame about doing that either.
I think as well. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm stepping back a bit from, particularly in the academic world, because it's like, you know what? There's a lot better places for me to say what I've got to say. I mean, academia has been a fantastic vehicle for me, but and like I said, in the last 5 or 6 years, it's become a very strange place. And again with Brexit has done this, but there's been that was a watermark of, you know, everything that's wrong with this country can be sort of shown within these, you know, working class, left behind communities. And, you know, and I wear those communities on my body. I am you know, and I suppose before I've even spoken, you know, I've got this negative there's a real negativity now about where I come from. You know, I say that I'm from, you know, Sutton in Ashfield, and not only now, I mean, I hear it all the time. Not only have I come from a place where they voted Brexit, they also voted a Tory in. They, you know, the disgust that people have now for those people. And I'm not going to let that I'm not going to let that stand, because that's a narrative about us. I mean, the other night somebody said something about, oh my God, you know, those poor Dennis Skinner got kicked up. Poor Dennis Skinner. he did fuck all in the last few years. The reason they voted him out is because he wouldn't bloody retire. And he was useless. And again, this is very, you know, the Labour Party won't like this, but it's true. Why do you think they voted him out? They loved that man in Bolsover. It was an act of desperation because he wouldn't retire. He was too old. The world was changing, and that area really needed bloody representation. He had got Sports Direct in his constituency. His was the constituency with ambulances turning up 6 times a day at Sports Direct, where one landlord owns 900 houses, which is 3 villages, and was packing them full of 15 people sharing beds. He was the constituent MP where they were moving young girls from London with babies and dropping them off in the middle of mining communities, ex-mining communities. They didn't know anybody. And I know this because I was doing that research. I phoned Dennis Skinner up. And I said to him, Dennis, what are you doing? He went mad at me. Who do you think you're talking to? None of this is happening. I was like, mate, you deserve what's coming to you. And yet,
it wasn't to do with Brexit. It was.
Dennis Skinner supported Brexit.
He did support it, didn't he? Yeah, he did.
He's always been a Brexit supporter.
Oh, he has for all those years. Yeah.
You knew how much those people
I asked him. I met him at a conference and I asked him, like, what can we do about getting more working class MPs? You know, what can we do about this? Because I was just so disappointed that nothing happened. And his take on it was like, he went on a bit of a rant about how people these days don't pull themselves up. The working class need to pull themselves up. They used to do. But I mean, I kind of, on the one hand, I think I know if he meant what I thought he meant. It's like we had more fight in us, and yes, we did. But we all know why that's been diminished.
But,
you know,
but again, that's looking at this through this particular lens. That's rubbish. Who knew anything about his constituencies? I knew them because I was in them areas doing research. If he knew how much energy it was taking for them people to get up in the morning and take their bloody kids to school, when there was absolutely nothing. In Shirebrook, there's no markets, no shops. Everything had been, there's nothing. The fight they had was getting up and taking their kids to school. How dare you say something else? You know, and again, for me, Dennis, I remember my mum, because again, she was a great trade unionist. Sutton in Ashfield, where I come from, is 2 miles over the border from Dennis Skinner's constituency. My mum knew him very, very well. And I remember in the early 90s, her having a go at him in a pub, telling me he should retire. That was a bloody, my mum died in 2001. And when she was alive, she was saying to him, you need to retire. And in the last, and he still doesn't, this was an act of desperation by the people who lived there. He had begged him to go.
Yeah. It's not, but I was looking into
belligerent.
Yeah. I was looking into the statistics the other day about this. It was like in the 1970s, there was something like 23% of MPs overall were from manual work backgrounds. And a much higher, obviously, percentage of the population, something like 70% of the population was in manual work at that time. So it was still quite a big underrepresentation even at that point. But now it's like the manual work population is something like, or if you look at manual and what they call like elementary jobs, and
Yeah.
low skill,
That
low
was,
status
yeah.
jobs. Yeah, that's more like 30% of the population, but the number of MPs from those same backgrounds is 4%.
Yeah.
So we've almost disappeared in terms of
Yes,
our
I know.
political
But
visibility.
we've disappeared in all, like I said, at the beginning of this, we've disappeared from politics, from academia, we've disappeared from the culture industries,
Yeah.
we've disappeared. We've disappeared.
I
We've
was
gone.
watching that thing called TVI, which used to be on in the 80s. I think it was on in the all through the 70s as well. I don't know about the 60s. It was called TVI. I don't know if it was on Granada or ATV or something like that, but it used to be on all the time, and all of the like politicians used to go on there, and they used to speak a lot more candidly about politics and about their political position on things and stuff, and also about the wranglings, within the parties and stuff like that. It was all a lot more out on your sleeve, so that people understood how politics worked and what was going on. The battles, see, like a lot of those factional battles, they still happen, but there's a gloss put over it, and the news don't dive into it and speak to the politicians like real people. They're all sort of media trained and stuff, and they're all sort of middle class as well. And it's like, how do we repoliticize the working class in that context? Is it possible? Where would you start? Where would you start?
Where would I start? I start with saying they're already highly politicized. It's just that you can't hear them. That's it. They're already highly politicized.
Yeah.
It's just that the political class don't want to hear them. They don't want to hear it.
So
when they're arguing with teachers or whatever, they're not doing the right thing by their kids. The working class people have always been political. It's just that they are political around their own communities. And is there any wonder they don't give a fuck what's going on in London and in Westminster? Because that's not their politics. Their politics is their schools, their communities, where they're going to live, what jobs are available to them and their children. They are already political. It's just that you're not tapping into it. You're not tapping into it. It's like, oh yeah, we don't want to know about that bit. Yeah. So if you talk to any working class person and you say to them what matters to them, what are they going to tell you? Their family.
Yeah.
Their family. That's political. I mean, if there's one thing that the feminists did give us, is that the personal is political. But for some reason, politicians don't, when it comes to working class people, it's all right, that's not political, that's just, when working class women say, my children are everything to me, that is political. They're telling you they will do anything to try and help their kids have a better life.
But if they're working class, their kids aren't going to have a better, they're not going to, I mean, like if you're working class, even if you get an equivalent qualification to someone who's from a middle class background, you're not going to go as far in your career, and research has shown us that. So if working class women had an opportunity to, I mean, this is a question that I have really, is because I feel like, I've had the experience of being working class, not being able to get on anywhere near as easily, but it holds me back more than being female. Definitely, I would say it has done my whole life. But I've had this political insight, which has given me a fire in my belly. It's given me a better understanding of how things work. And like Deirdre and I were discussing it the other day, she said, well, when you've got that insight, it gives you the tools to be able to have a go at dismantling the system. You can't do it alone, and it's knackering, bumping up against it all the time, but you can kind of give it a try if you're armed with that insight. So like with that, I think, and a more ethical way of approaching that would be to make sure that people in like obviously people in low income communities, they've been the hardest hit by the crisis every which way, whether it's like health, or whether it's loss of life, or whether it's loss of income or drop in hours or whatever. They've been battered, and they will continue to be battered, by this. So I think, an appropriate response would be, or one appropriate response would be, make sure you put like resources into making sure in those communities, the spaces that feel like they're owned by that community, and they're spaces where people can access like political education or whatever on their own terms, in closed working class groups.
And how's that going to happen? Because
I don't know.
I I remember I used to be quite idealistic and think that could happen. I remember, and then again, I guess who I bumped up against, our local lovely Labour Party. They don't want that to happen. Yeah. Look, do you know what? I don't know if you've ever heard of a writer. When I first went to university, I read all this feminist stuff and I thought, what a load of fucking shit. And I remember all these feminists I'd met in the 1980s in the strike, and I just thought they're all fucking wankers. And then I read Black feminism.
Yeah.
And it was American literature mostly.
Yeah.
I read Bell Hooks and I read Audre Lorde.
Who was the other
and
one?
Audre Lorde.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And I read their work, and they were Black women, but they spoke to my experience.
Okay.
My working class British experience.
Well, that's what I mean. We've got brilliant examples like that we could be sharing.
But let me just tell you what Audre Lorde says, and she says it clearly.
Yeah.
And it's never left me. Audre Lorde says that you cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. You cannot. So therefore, if you are thinking of trying to do something within the system, and that is the same system that has oppressed you and not allowed you to progress, you're not getting anywhere with that.
There's something that I'm interested in, which is working class women starting up collectives. It's worked well in some areas, and they've been able to do like the kind of jobs that they would do previously for an exploitative employer. They do it as a collective, so they're looking out for each other and they're running it as their own thing, and they make more money, and it's like much more empowering experience. I think because the economy just doesn't work for the working class, it's not designed to, and it never will. I think we can't wait for a Labour government to sort all that out. We can't wait for any government to sort all that out.
Well, did you know, just going back to Labour Party again, again, I've got to debunk this myth about shall we wait for the Labour Party to sort this out? No. Can you tell me when it did? Can you tell me which Labour government?
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Because this mythical Labour government into the future. Can you tell me, where who is it?
When did it do that?
What are you modelling on? Is it 1945? Nearly 100 years ago?
No.
When did it?
No.
Because
my understanding is that it wasn't set up to be run by the working class at any point. It was set up really as a response to the fact that the working class were getting a little bit too they were having too many ideas about sort of their own empowerment within the workplace, and so it was a distraction. And to keep it in check. I'm not interested in in Labour theory. I'm interested in really what has happened, and I've watched local government and local authorities and local MPs and local councillors of every single colour and stripe and persuasion work for the system. Yeah, and just for themselves.
And the thing is if the system works for you, that's fine, because it does. Because the thing is we have to be honest. The system isn't bad for everybody.
No.
This system for some people is really good. It works for them. They have a good. It's all right. And that's why you can understand why people want to vote and they want to be involved in it, because it bloody works for them.
But if we've got a divided working class now, because there are some in the working class who've done okay, it is working for them now. Maybe in the past they struggled, but like they've been able to sort of buy their own council house and everything's changed for them. There is that section of the working class that now doesn't regard themselves as being working class, isn't there? Does that make much of a difference, not having them as part of the picture? Or is it?
I mean, not really, because I wouldn't know who they are. Because even though you say, they bought again, another myth that we need to do, they bought the council house. I know a lot of that generation who are getting elderly now, who bought their council houses, who are now getting elderly, and the houses are needing repairs. And they haven't got the money to do it. And now they've realised that what they've got is they've got a bloody money pit. You've got working class people who bought council houses, and again, it's all geographical. If you bought your council house in London 30 years ago, cashing in. If you bought your council house in Sutton in Ashfield 30 years ago, what have you got? You've got something that needs a lot of work to go in, and
Right.
you're responsible for it. You know, if you live in Sutton in Ashfield and you bought your house in 1982, you know, you got made redundant in 1992. You know, your first thing you would have done with your redundancy money is you pay your mortgage off, which you probably would have been able to do because it would have been that low. You never work again, or you hardly work again. Here you are, 65, 70 years old. You've got your bought council house. What else? What? You know, again, there's big myths about this because in different parts of the country, this works in different ways. You know, if you live in London, if you lived in Brixton, you bought your council house in 1982, if you was to sell that house now, you're going to sell that for £600,000-700,000.
Yeah.
You bought your council house in Sutton in Ashfield.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't buy your council house and become middle class. You bought your council house and carried on living there.
Yeah, but I know some working class people who've done traditional working class jobs and they've done okay. Like when you say done okay, they're enjoying an all right retirement. There's quite a lot of working class people now, like that can live half the year abroad, or they've got like a second. You know, there has been a little bubble, I think, where it appeared as if class lines were being blurred, but it's really shrunk.
But again, that was a very, very short period.
It was,
in time.
yeah.
You know, those full salary pensions were usually people who worked in public sector jobs and retired who started work at a particular time and then retired at a particular time, because those pensions don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
You know, those jobs don't even exist anymore. So yes, there is a group of people that are probably retiring now.
Yeah.
Who if they worked in a public sector job, retired on a full salary pension.
Yes.
But they don't exist. You know, they're very few and far. You know, they're a blip, and it's dead easy to grab onto them. Or it doesn't tell the whole story, does it? I mean, you know, we all know people. You know, such and such who's a plumber. Yeah, he's coining it in ears, whatever. There are always these stories, but that's not the working class experience or struggle at the moment.
But I think there is a place for political education, because, and I don't mean party political education, I mean the kind of political education you've had and I've had, where you've had an opportunity to have an insight into the class system and how it works.
Yes, of course, I agree with you.
Causes of poverty are class and not having enough bloody money, you know.
Well, I mean, the causes of poverty is the distribution of resources.
Yeah.
Some people have too much and some people don't get enough.
And it's important for people to understand that, isn't it? For them to be able to be empowered. Yeah. And
that's why it's important that we talk about class, because again, people think that this is all about merit. In my book, I interviewed these two sisters, and we talked about the private school in Nottingham, and they said, well, you know, those people must have worked really hard to get their kids in that school.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that narrative is really pervasive.
Yeah.
That if you know you work hard, you must have done something really well to get that get that success.
Yeah.
You know, equally, you must have been doing something really bad to get that faith. And again, I wrote about this. You know, I wrote about women. Oh, well, you know, tell me about, you know, I lived in this flat and it was awful and but really, you know, it was my fault because I should have tried harder at school. You know, my mum told me to try harder at school and I didn't. So therefore I didn't get a good job or whatever.
Yes.
And it's always the same.
Someone else's narrative.
You know, someone else's narrative about their lives.
About them,
and, and, you know, and about our collective lives.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if that's the only thing I achieve in my life, which is why I'm always at war with people.
Me too. Yeah, I totally get you.
Because I'm challenging that narrative. Because even with you, I'm saying, hang on a minute, no.
Yeah. No, I can't cope with it because I hear people. I don't think it's ethical, right? So say you're talking about race. You know, it wouldn't be tolerated for someone who's not from a BAME background, right, to be within a workshoppy situation around race or BAME issues,
Yeah.
giving an opinion that's not informed by evidence whatsoever. It's just based on what the frigging Daily Mail says or something like that. It would be unethical. It would be unacceptable. But it happens with poverty in class. People come in and they'll say, well, you know, we need to make sure that people know how to budget properly. You know, we need to make sure that people know how to cook a healthy meal. Or, you know, they'll say we need to get people into jobs. And it's like, well, in-work poverty is increasing. You know, you're like single mom, you know, might move off benefits into work, and her income might increase a bit, but she's still in poverty, and she shouldn't be if she's working, you know. And it's like, they're the conversations I want people to have and get angry about. And if no one's getting angry about it, it's not going to change. But when you've got middle class people working with working class people, they sanitize anger and analysis out of it.
And what they also do is not just sanitize anger, they connect working class anger with violence, stupidity, you know, not being educated, you know, and this starts at school, you know, with kids getting angry, getting excluded. And this is, you know, and now, you know, and I work in a university, you know, and if I, you know, I got a verbal warning for, you know, for saying something that was seen to be aggressive on Twitter, you know. And you know, it's all, you know, it's always the same. They're on it with us, or which means that your anger can never be legitimate. Never. Never.
It drives me crazy. It drives me crazy.
Fucking angry about this. Well, yes. What? He's getting angry like that's not going to help you, is it?
It's important, because there would never have been like civil rights if people had never got angry about race, and there'd have never been a women's movement if women had never got angry about, you know, women's disempowerment. Anger's important. Honesty, analysis, all of those things are important, and I think we need closed working class spaces that enable people to explore those things safely.
Definitely.
You say it's okay to ask those questions, you know, it's okay to feel those feelings. It's healthy.
Definitely. And I'll tell you what we also need to do as well. The middle class needs to be kept right out of it, because they divide. They divide, because working class people are multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial. And if we don't get those spaces where we can sit together without the middle class, what happens is those divisions just get put in. You know, because this is what I'm finding as well in this sort of age of identity politics, is, you know, we are told that black working class people are different to white working class people, and they've got different whatever, and they haven't. You know, being working class will connect people. Their life experience will be shared far more by being working class.
I think so. Definitely.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, you know, recently we can see with what's happened with the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, the Black Lives Matter movement, what it's done, black people have become more visible in certain spaces. So, you know, you notice that on the BBC there's a lot more black presenters. You notice, you know, that black people are becoming visible in more spaces. But they're not diverse in who they are or what they're saying.
In class terms.
Yeah, well, not just in class terms, but in anything, it's still saying the same. So it's almost like the structure stays the same. But they'll let some people in as long as they're not, they don't, you know, they're not changing the structure.
Yes, you're not too challenging.
And so that's what you started to see. I mean, we're not seeing a change in structure.
No,
we're just seeing sort of piecemeal, and they've always done that with working class communities, always. You know, we'll have a golden hour where, you know, something incredible will come out of our communities, and then that's it. You know, it's like the Shameless effect. You'll get, you know, you get one really great fucking series of Shameless that was written by Paul Abbott, and then the next minute Paul Abbott's gone, no, I'm not writing this no more, it's Channel 4 wants it to be ridiculous. He moves off to get some other writers in, and then it's 9 series of just like stereotypical shit. And
it's been appropriated.
And it just is happening over and over again on multiple of different levels all the time. I've heard that it happens. I've heard that it happens in there's black television shows, mainstream television shows with black actors in and black people that's been written, but the writers are white. So I know that this is happening. It's happening on a multitude of different levels. The middle class have got it sewn up. So are you going to try and take apart their system from within? Do you think you can do that? Because I don't think we can. You see, I don't think we can.
No, I think there's some way I can.
You'll die trying.
Yeah.
I don't want to die trying.
No, I don't know how else. I don't know how else I can do it, but I've got an opportunity to open up the conversation about what the root causes of poverty are, and that's kind of what I've done. So I've taken my opportunity to do that, and we've got like 7 other councils that have done it. They've taken on that, so they're looking at poverty as an equalities issue in its own right, not looking at class, because that would be way out the ballpark.
Well, I wrote this report for this European research centre years ago. And they asked me to write about poverty. And I wrote stigmatisation.
Yes.
Because that's a poverty of respect. So, and again, and I wrote about that, and the European, one thing about European policy, they get that sort of stuff.
That's cool.
One of the biggest things what we've got poverty of. Poverty is poverty anyway. We shouldn't be that. So, but one of the biggest things that's part of all of it is dignity. Because how many people who live in poverty have got any dignity?
No, exactly.
And that again is one of those. It's that only somebody who's never ever had to live their lives that way would understand how important dignity is. And it is. I know women who has felt more dignified by feeding their kids through being on the game than going to a food bank.
Right. God almighty.
And that is a dignity. Unless you've lived that, you'll never understand that.
No.
I understand that.
As soon as your bank account's like in the red and you're on the bones of your arse, all of a sudden you have to phone up different services, and you have to, and you get spoken to like you're a child. That's
and you've done something wrong, and it's your fault, and and you know what? And sometimes it just becomes the last straw, and you go, I can't do this again. I cannot fucking do this again. I've been there. I've been there where I would much rather steal. In fact, I'd rather steal straight away. I wouldn't even think about it. You know what I mean? Will I go and like have to shame myself in the social, or will I nick this? Fuck it, I'll nick it. There's no even question about that. It's not as shameful getting caught in Tesco's nicking as it is having to go cap in hand to some fucking smug bastard in the job centre. He's gonna like. You know what my son wrote? I don't know if you've read anything my son wrote.
I haven't. I'd love to.
He wrote about his experience about being in the job centre. And signing on. And it fucking breaks you. He's like, he says, the worst day of my life, and the girl behind, trying to make jokes. And I'm just sat there thinking, I just want to fucking die. That is what poverty feels like. That's what it feels like.
Deirdre was saying she was a benefits cheat for a while because she was cleaning on the side, for cash in hand.
Again, I've said this how many times. Listen, let me tell you this now. Nobody can live on benefits.
No.
Nobody can live on benefits.
No.
Every fucker is a benefits cheat. I did it for years and years because you can't live. You can survive, but who wants to fucking survive?
My mate, when I was at university, we were both single parents, and she went to a different university. We were both working class. It was like really unusual because it was the beginning of the 90s. But because one of us had done it, the other one was like, "Wow, shit, you can do that even though you've got a kid and you and you don't know anyone else who's done it, and everyone's telling you can't do it." But she hadn't passed a test, but she didn't give a fuck. She just got a car, and so our university was a number of miles away, and to make it more doable for her and her kid, she just got a car and just drove it. And no one ever stopped her. And she didn't.
My mate used to. In fact, loads of girls I know used. In fact, I've got loads of friends who got done for it, driving without no license.
Yeah, because now they've succeeded, but they've succeeded because of having to do loads of dodgy things.
Well, to be honest, it's not dodgy.
No,
it's not dodgy. I mean, so I wrote in my book about the ways that women pass on that knowledge to each other.
Right.
They tell you what to say when you have to go to the social.
Yes.
They tell you how to get through that interview.
Yes.
And it's not, but what you're doing all the time is you're having to tell a narrative about yourself that is not true. But you are having to do that in order to appease that person across from you who thinks that is true. And one of the things that I wrote about and was about when you go to the social to start, if you're on income support, and they used to ask you about the father of your child.
Yes.
You used to have to say you didn't know who he was. Because if you knew who he was, they'd go and chase.
Go after him. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you have to say, and again, other women told me how to do this, is, tell them that you don't know who it is. So step one in this procedure is you have to say that you have no recollection of who this kid's dad is.
Yeah.
And this is and the process just gets worse and worse because you are absolutely having to shame yourself.
Yeah. And your identity is being attacked, and your story is.
What system would do that to you? What other system does that? What does that?
Nowhere.
What other group of people would have to fucking do that?
Would have to put up with it.
But I've got no choice.
Yeah.
And actually, that making up of such a fucking terrible story is completely believed about you, which is why you have to do it. I remember my sister-in-law saying to me, and you know what, the only way we ever got through any of it was laughing. So I remember one day my sister-in-law said to me, "Oh, I've had to have the interview today," and I was like, because they used to call you in, and they'd say, "So who's the child's father?" And you'd say, I don't know, I can't remember. It was a one-night stand. Right? Could you give me a description, please? And after that, I'd go, "Oh, I can't fucking remember."
You have to give a description.
But I remember my sister-in-law said, yeah, I remember him. He had a hunchback and one arm. And this woman at the social, and she said she got the satisfaction knowing she had to write that fucker down.
Yeah.
She had to write down he was an hunchback with one arm.
So she's taking control of the situation.
Because it was so horrendous. But
working class people don't take their agency in that way so much maybe now.
No,
if we're talking to people about their poverty story and they're just swallowing it and repeating it, and it's not true.
But that's what we were doing as well. But that don't mean it don't hurt.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean, it's like when you stop and think about this baby.
Yeah.
That is the most wonderful, beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
And you are diminishing it from day fucking one because it's the only way you can survive. Mandy, I want to stab these bastards.
Yes. Yeah.
For what they've done to us.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We've got to do something.
They don't understand. They don't understand the fucking trauma and pain that does to you.
No.
I look back now at my son and this beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I have to demean his being from the first minute he opened his eyes. Like my mum had to do that to me. Surely I'm allowed to be angry for this.
Yeah, because if you were middle class, you could probably afford to you wouldn't have to even think about, income or work or anything. Motherhood in and of itself, I mean, that's an interesting question as well, is like, as a feminist, as a middle class feminist, you're almost not supposed to talk about motherhood and femaleness and your bond with your children. It's not really the done thing. But I think for working class women, our children aren't, it's going to sound harsh to say it, but we're not looking at what they can produce in terms of competing and, the social, protecting their social position on the hierarchy and that kind of thing. And it's like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of working class women who value being home with their kids if they were able to afford to be, but it's been taken away.
Well, I think for us as well, for working class women, for the working class motherhood and middle class motherhood is two different things, completely two different things.
Yeah.
Working class motherhood, for a start, has been completely demonized.
Yeah.
Totally. We are responsible for the generation of thugs and hoodies and, gang members and, council estate fucking wretches roaming
And
the streets.
teenage pregnancy.
Yeah, and teenage pregnancy, and we are responsible for all of this. It comes from our body. But then at the same time, within a working class community, and I mean within us of what we value motherhood really highly.
Yeah.
So as a woman in a working class family, you don't ever become important or valued until you become a mother. And you know what? Middle class might not like that, but it's true. Because, your role is a bit in between. It's like, you've gone to work, when you're going to get a boyfriend, when you're going to get married, when you're going to have a baby. And those things give you status within your community and within your family. You're never really a fully formed woman in the working class community until you've had a baby, really. And as a mother.
That's a very different conversation, isn't it, than what you normally have about women and motherhood and what have you.
And you know what? People might find that very uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable. But some things about working class communities are uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think working class women are more focused on their relationships and their children, and that's denigrated as being disempowered. But it's not necessarily, is it? There's a lot of really positive things about that.
One of the things, again, I wrote in my book is when being a mother in your community is highly valued, why wouldn't you want to be one?
Yes. Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Yeah. But if you say that to middle class women, they find that horrifying. Because we've fought to be allowed to be equal within the workplace, and yes, we should. But it's.
They don't think that. Again, they don't think that being, they think that being a teenage mom is a horrific thing. For us, being a teenage mom was the way that you got value in your community. Because you became the thing that gets valued. Just being a normal girl on a council estate.
I think there's something else with that as well. I think that if you're a middle class woman, you probably maybe you do put career and status and money, that's more, you're socialized for that to be a high priority kind of thing.
Well, the thing is you've got a chance of getting that.
Yeah, and you getting
that.
Yeah. And it's more like they fit their children in around that, and the children are more of the inconvenience sometimes than the career.
Our jobs are the inconvenience.
Yeah, definitely, because our jobs are usually shit, and the thing that's satisfying in our lives isn't a career, it's our kids. Yeah.
It's the family and the community.
Yes, yeah.
And again, we've and that's, brings us back to the question one. That's what makes me working class.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I'm gonna oh my god, this is a really, really long chat. I'm gonna wrap it up with that, and I probably need to split it into 3 different videos, but I like the way we got back to that question. I like it that we came back to that through motherhood, and we started off talking about motherhood as well. So.
Yeah, do you know what? It's if you spend 2 hours with me, like you just have, you know, and that's why there's one thing that all my detractors, they think the one thing they can't do is they go, she's not working class anymore, she's a lecturer or whatever. But anybody who's sat with me for more than 10 minutes, it's undeniable. We
probably both just dropped ourselves in the shit. Well, good.
I'm not. You know what? There's nothing here I haven't said.
No, you can't. I love this about talking to other working class people, because you can say things that you can't say in most of the spheres where I operate, you know, within politics, even though it's on the left. No way is this kind of a conversation permitted. You'd be closed down in fight, and that's what you're saying, isn't it? That's wrong. That's why it's not attractive to people. Not because they're not intelligent and not politicized, but it's like, who the fuck's going to put themselves up for that? You know, you can't be yourself.
Yeah, the minute you start talking, you know what? The minute you start going, hang on a minute, you're not allowed to speak because your emotion's not arisen. It's like, hang on a minute, I'm passionate about this.
Yeah.
You know, I'm passionate about this. I care about it.
Yeah.
So you tell him not to speak.
Yeah.
And that's, you know,
point of order.
Yeah, and that's why I agree with you on entirely. We need spaces or hours where we can be, where it can start off that we all shout over each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we have got so much pent up stuff to say. None of us can wait.
Yeah.
You know, it starts off with a mass shouting. It won't end that way.
No.
But it starts that way, and nobody's judging you for doing it.
Yeah, and it's legitimate.
And you're in a legitimate space because nobody's gonna, you know, you're not gonna get asked to leave or change the subject, or you know, I think you better, you know, people get upset and quite rightly.
Sanitized and
and I think for me, you know, I'm thinking about different ways of doing this.
Yeah.
And it's the things that are completely outside. You know, where you know, completely outside, to the point of, you know, I don't even want to be paying rent on something because I don't want to have to find the money and have to beg up to this person.
Yeah.
I want, because I've done it. I've done all of this.
Yes. Yeah.
Just the same treadmill over and over.
No. I want to go and live in a shed, just a nice little shed somewhere.
Leave me. You know what I want to do? I want to just. I don't know. I want to go.
You won't. You'll keep fighting.
I'll keep fighting, and I'll keep annoying people, and I'll you know, and I'll keep going. I just, like I said, if there's only one thing that I ever achieve in my life, you know, when I'm gone, you know, if people say to me, do you know what? She never put up with that bullshit narrative.
Yeah.
If that's what you can say about me, I'll be happy.
You're carrying that torch. You are, and I really admire you for it. I'm so grateful that you've come on to talk and talked as openly as you have as well, because there aren't enough of us that have a platform to do that, and it's too easy, you know, for people to be, what do you call it, like culturally appropriated, so that they just fit in, you know, with what's least offensive to the middle class people that are usually in the senior positions to us. And we need people to use in their platform, if they're working class and they've managed to get there, to articulate these things and keep articulating them and keep them on the agenda. And that's what you do. So I'm grateful to you for doing it. You're a massive inspiration. Yeah.
No, thank you, Mandy, and you continue to do it as well. We do it, you know, we fight at different ends, but hopefully we'll get in the middle at some point.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome, Mandy. Have a good night.
All right.